Charlie Creme, Bracketology, ESPN Women's Basketball, joins us on 365 Sports. We appreciate Charlie. He's been with us many times in the past. And Charlie, let me ask you this. Is this the deepest field? I'm not talking 1 through 12 or whatever, but are there more teams this year in women's basketball you think that can win a national title than perhaps recent memory?
Absolutely. I think we're looking at one of the more wide open years. Now, it's not wide open in the sense that anybody can win it. But if you're talking about 6 or 7 teams, whereas in years past, for instance, last year, we'll take South Carolina. I think if the idea was, hey, if you're going to bet on this, are you going to take South Carolina or the field? Well, now there's not that singular team that you would put up against the field because there's, as I said, 6 or 7 of them. So from that standpoint, absolutely. It's going to make, I think, the regionals and then, of course, getting to the Final Four just great because it's a flip of the coin with some of these teams. A lot of them have already played each other and beaten one another. Mm-hmm. And then the next time out, the team who lost beat another team. And it's been going on now for a couple of months. And I think it's going to all culminate in March with a great last couple of weeks of the season.
Charlie, Texas, the number 1 team in the country, not quite unanimous, but made that shift here recently. And, man, what a job Vic Schaefer has done. What has stood out to you most about the Longhorns, and why are they a team that this year looks like one of those safe bets to perhaps raise the trophy at the end?
Well, I tell you, it's Vic Schaefer. Going back to his days as an assistant coach at Texas A&M, it's defense, toughness. He knows how to coach that. And I recall the Final Four that they were in remember the year that they beat UConn on the last second shot.
Yep.
He coached that game. He coached every possession like it was the last possession he was ever going to watch on a basketball court. He was so into it. He was the puppet master with his players. He was putting them on places on the court just by the sheer tenacity of his voice, and he did that for 40 minutes, and it worked. And that intensity flows over to his teams. It's now flows over to his teams in Austin. The one concern I do have about Texas, they're an interesting model, I think, for this, and who we're gonna see cut down the nets at the end, is that kind of defense obviously can win because even the best of teams, they are able to shut down or at least control. However, offensively for them, if they can't get the ball inside, they're kind of stuck. They don't shoot the three. They don't shoot it a lot, and when they do, they don't shoot it particularly well. And in this day and age of college basketball, I think you generally have to make a few of them. Now, maybe it's only going to need to be a few of them for them to win, but they're a team definitely, you bring them up first because they are definitely a team to watch, and they've got 2 very distinct characteristics. One that says, yes, pick them to win the national championship, and another one that says, maybe be a little afraid to pick them.
Well, you know, what he did at A&M with Gary Blair on that team that won the national title, beat Baylor and Brittany Griner in the regional final, and then what he did at Mississippi State as the head coach on that team, that run they made was special, no doubt about it. There's a lot of teams, Notre Dame, UConn, South Carolina, Juju Watkins at USC, among UCLA. But I want to get to the Big 12, and then we'll go back to those teams that are at the very top of the rankings. Baylor has now won 9 straight with Nikki Collin. They've really kind of been on a heater. They won at Kansas State last night, but they're not a very high seed. How high of a seed can they possibly get if they beat TCU this weekend?
Well, I have them as a 5 right now. And I think with a win over TCU, and then essentially that means they're going to win the Big 12 outright, or they will have won the Big 12 outright. That says something, certainly. I think they can get to a 4. I'm not sure they can get higher than that. And it's gonna come down to a lot of the committee members' viewpoints on how you're playing currently versus your whole body of work. There are different people on that committee look at things maybe a little bit differently. And Baylor's entire body of work, the beginning part of the season, non-conference, wasn't nearly as impressive as it is now. So I think it's going to come down to those conversations if they can get any higher than a 4. But right now, I would say based on what I know and what I sense from the committee and kind of historically, I think 4 may ultimately be the ceiling. but that also means hosting games in Waco. So that's a huge boost. But getting to a 3 could be really important as we start to really get granular and break it down. Because if you're a 4, you're definitely playing one of the teams you just mentioned in the regional semifinals. If you're a 2, or if you're a 3 rather, then you're playing a 2, and it might be a 2 that's not among the teams that you just listed, and that might open the door for another win, another round, and another opportunity to go to the Final Four.
Charlie, is there a team in the Big 12 that you think has a shot to cut the nets? I mean, the highest ranked is TCU there at 8. You've got a K-State. You've got a West Virginia, a Baylor, an Oklahoma State. Just kind of, I guess, in general, what are your thoughts on the league at this point in the year? And are there any contenders, or I guess who jumps out to you as far as making noise here moving forward?
Did you know that most calorie deficit calculators don't work? My dietitian recommended the Lasta app to me, and it turned out to be the only one that got my calorie deficit right. Thanks to it, I lost 14 pounds in 1 week. Ready to kickstart your journey to healthy weight loss? Calculate your ideal calorie deficit using the Lasta app right now.
Well, it's not going to be. I'm not going to exactly split the atom here when I say that TCU and Baylor would be my 2 teams that I would put at the forefront of having a chance to make a run. And right now they are the 2 best teams in the league, which makes the game coming up very exciting. I think we saw from Kansas State last night that they're either running out of gas, because that's a really good defensive team that didn't play particularly good defense last night, or just the fact that not seemingly getting Ayoka Lee back is just too much of a hurdle to overcome to really beat the better teams in the country. West Virginia, I think, is just a little too limited offensively. I think we've seen that in past tournaments with them. They're one of those teams that none of the upper echelon teams really want to play, because on a single game situation, the way they play defense, the way they scrap and take the ball away, they're a difficult matchup. But over the course of a 6-game or a 4-game run to get to the Final Four, I don't know that they're consistent enough offensively to be able to do that. They could be one of those teams that knocks off somebody that you're not expecting, but then kind of falls flat in the next game. So I would lean. TCU has the guard play. Certainly, Baylor has good guard play, and that tends to get you a ways in the tournament. So I'm going to lean on those 2 teams as the best chance for the league to kind of break through and maybe get to Tampa.
I brought up a lot of teams, and none of that is like breaking news. A couple of others that are in that mix. NC State just beat Notre Dame in that dramatic double overtime game. There's also, of course, LSU lost to Texas. Who are your right now number 1 seeds? And can what happens in the next 2 weeks just validate that, or can somebody get bumped off that line?
I think someone could get bumped off. It's been interesting trying to kind of parse these because of some of the head-to-head games we talked about earlier. But right now my number 1s are UCLA, Texas, South Carolina, and Notre Dame. And with USC and Connecticut just behind and then LSU just a smidge behind that. And then NC State as your number 8 team. Mm-hmm. I think that USC can break in. Because they still have to play UCLA at least one more time, perhaps twice, depending on how the Big Ten tournament goes. The thing that I mentioned, the head-to-head, the thing with that kind of has me wondering what the committee is going to do is you got a team like Notre Dame who just lost their last game, has 3 losses, but they have 3 wins against all these other teams we're talking about. They're undefeated against the other teams in the mix here. So how do you take a team like that off the 1 line? But then you look at the 3 losses, and one of them's to TCU, one of them's to Utah, which is a couple of Big 12 teams getting the better Notre Dame back at the Cayman Islands in November, and then they didn't lose again until Sunday. But how the committee or the individual members look at that kind of the head-to-head situation, because you've got South Carolina's lost to UCLA, but South Carolina's beaten Texas. Texas has beaten South Carolina. South Carolina and Texas have both beaten LSU, which is why I kind of have LSU a little bit further behind the pack. USC's beat UCLA, and they beat UConn, but they also lost to Notre Dame. So you see what I'm saying here? It's a big mix. And Notre Dame is the one team, when you just take that collection of teams, that has emerged in those head-to-head matchups. So I'm curious as to where the committee views Notre Dame now and how they will view them on Selection Sunday, depending on how the next couple of weeks shake out. But I think we could have some movement, but I think the movement is likely going to be maybe a Notre Dame or a South Carolina falling off, and maybe a UConn. Although the problem with UConn is they don't have any resume building games the rest of the way. Creighton's the best team that they have perhaps left on their schedule, and that's a mid seed type team. Nobody else in the Big East is even really sniffing the tournament. So UConn's gonna have a tough time building anything further on their resume, and they have those losses to Notre Dame and USC. So USC is probably the team with the best chance because of opportunity. And in the Big Ten, not only are they playing UCLA, but they're also playing other resume quad 1, quad 2 type games the rest of the way.
Charlie, final thing for me, I was just curious, as somebody who covers the game, how much have you felt the wave of momentum of the last year and a half? Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, everything that's come with that, Paige Beckers, just all of the kind of spotlight that's been shown on women's basketball in particular. Has that been noticeable? Have you felt that to some degree? And just what's that been like to see the extra attention being paid to the game?
Well, it's been great. It definitely feel the extra eyeballs, the extra notoriety. I don't think we're going to be able to replicate last year in anything that happens this year. And we just don't have that same star power that Caitlin Clark brought to the table. Now, a year from now, 2 years from now, Juju Watkins could be that person. Right now, I think we don't really quite have that level of excitement and exuberance around the country, but the eyeballs are still there. The numbers are still good. The attention is still there. When you get a performance by Juju Watkins against UCLA in their last meeting, unfortunately it was on Peacock, so a lot of people maybe didn't get a chance to see it. But if anybody who did watch that game, that would be the propeller to kind of that next level of buzz, because that performance was otherworldly, and it's the kind of stuff that Caitlin Clark did last year. And if we can get more of that, then I think we will have a chance to maybe at least get in the same ballpark as all that excitement from a year ago.
UConn's, you mentioned they have Creighton next, and that's it in the Big East, but they beat the hell out of South Carolina. Is Don Staley's team just in one of those, everybody, even if you're really, really good, you're going to have a funk? UConn just a bad matchup, because they also, South Carolina lost, of course, to Texas, and we know Texas is really, really good. So what happened there, in your opinion?
Well, on paper, UConn's actually a good matchup for South Carolina, which made that game all that more mind-boggling. I was there in Columbia, and I believe that at one point my chin did hit the gym floor because I was so shocked at what I was seeing. And because you look at a team like Texas, you say, okay, that's a matchup that can beat South Carolina. They're tough. They're physical inside. They've got size. They've actually got more size than South Carolina. They do a lot of the same things that South Carolina does, and if they could do them better on that particular day, then there's a good chance they're going to win the game. UConn doesn't have size. Is not considered a physical team, but you know what? That day, UConn beat South Carolina every loose ball. They were the tougher team. They offensive rebounded like crazy. And the bottom line is they made a whole bunch of shots. Mm-hmm. And when UConn has shooters, and when when they're in that groove, they certainly can beat anyone. It's just that this year they haven't quite found it yet. What I'm curious, and this is the downside of the UConn playing in the Big East, I'm curious as if that was the day that they found it. That's the Gino Auriemma has been saying most of the year that he thinks this team will be at its best in March, and some of the pieces have been either on the sidelines with injuries or they haven't quite come together from a chemistry standpoint. But he sees it. I trust him. He's got a resume, so I trust what he says even about his own team. So he usually doesn't say things like this, but he said before that South Carolina game, I really think this is going to be a really good team in March, and then they went out and proved it against South Carolina. But what it scares me with South Carolina is that now they were beaten in 2 out of the 3 games in that sequence by teams with very contrasting styles. Normally there's one avenue to beat a South Carolina, and now we saw that there's at least 2, and that tells me that South Carolina isn't quite the same as they have been, maybe even earlier in the season.
You know, Charlie, we appreciate it. I know you got a lot of things you're juggling, but it seems to me, and I don't know if you would agree or not, we covered a lot of basketball. I went to school when I was at Stephen F. Austin. Sue Gunner was there, and they were a great program back in, again, I'm old enough to, back in the late 70s, early 80s when she eventually went to LSU. But to me, women's basketball had 4 to 5 teams a year. And it has expanded. And it seemed like we might have been covering the game that changed everything when Louisville beat Brittany Griner and Baylor in Oklahoma City in a regional tournament. And it seems like for the last 10 or 12 years since that time, you know, another team or two every year seems to rise up, and the commitment's better, the money's better, but it seemed like that's about the time when everyone was like, oh, my God, because you just didn't have upsets like that in women's basketball.
No, you didn't, and we're seeing more of them. We still don't see them at the same level as the men's game, but the women's game is on a different timeline than the men's game. So I think that's important for people to remember. Is, you know, the women didn't have an NCAA tournament until 1981. Like the men started in 1939. So there's a big difference there. But we're able to witness what we're living right now is this evolution where, as you said, you know, you got 10, 15 years ago, you had 3 or 4 teams. Sometimes in some seasons in that range, you had one team. You clearly, like, there were those UConn teams. There was UConn and then everybody else. So there was South Carolina and then everybody else. Well, now we have this. We have Iowa do what it did over the course of the last couple of seasons with Clark. You've got USC and UCLA now at the upper echelon of the sport, whereas, you know, USC was in the very beginning of the timeline I'm talking about, but it hasn't really been that team. But in that time frame, you saw the rise of Mississippi State. You know, that same year you're talking about where Louisville beat Baylor. Cal also made that Final Four. So, you know, we see little examples of that where we get an added team here. We get a program if they get the right coach or they land the right recruit, they can be at the forefront of the game for a while, and that's good because I run into so many people over the years knowing what I do. And they'll say, "Oh, women's basketball, it's you know, UConn, right? You know, your job's easy. Just pick UConn and you're done, right?" And that hurt me a little bit for people to have that feeling, but they weren't entirely wrong. Well, now they'd be absolutely wrong, and that's nothing but great.
Charlie, thank you for what you do. Appreciate your time, and thanks for giving us the time.
You got it. Anytime, fellas.
Charlie Creme with us from ESPN Women's Basketball, and